I'm the professor of ancient Greek, and therefore I must take the auspices. And I declare that the auspices are auspicious. And my friend, my lifetime friend, Dr. Kazuhiko Okuda, will help us in that regard. Dr. Okuda has been my family friend since the mid-60s. He, at age 21, he came to North America and became a fast friend. And he and I studied together at the University of Toronto, where we did our PhDs. But he started on what could have been what might look a pretty inauspicious occasion. He was born 2 years before the American Holocaust of Nagasaki. He was born in Nagasaki. He happened to be out of town at the time. Some people try to justify the first Holocaust event a couple of days before that, but the second is even, I think, is totally out of bounds. But President Truman said that God was talking to him, and I don't quite understand which God he was talking to. But Kaz was out of town and came back into town shortly thereafter and has been in town for his career. He has been a student of political science in the US and also in Canada, and he's a Canadian citizen as well, and does a lot of Canadian-Japanese liaison. So you've got the information on your handout. Let me just leave it at that. All right?
David, for your kind introductions, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and Happy New Year. I'm very pleased to be here to share my sort of observation analysis with you. And I don't know how much time should I sort of spend on my talk, and perhaps some question and answer session, maybe.
Half hour, 3/4 of an hour? What do you want? 3/4 of an hour?
3/4 of an hour, and some questions. Okay, good. Maybe I should just introduce. I just got this yesterday, so I don't know how to use it.
That's some new technology.
I'm going to talk about this Iwakura mission, and I'll explain it later on, but in fact, these are sort of top major reformers, and Iwakura is right here, still here as a top notch, just after the Meiji Restoration. And the Meiji Restoration and the Meiji era begins in 1868. And here we have vice ambassadors and the Iwakura as ambassador plenipotentiary. And these are all Ito, Okubo, and Kido. These are all very important political leaders in the early Meiji era, and had tremendous effort put into it in modernizing Japan. But certainly they have learned a great deal by traveling America and Europe. And starting from here, you can see the Japanese archipelago in black there, sail from Yokohama. It's a steamship at the time then cross.
The settings.
It's because it's not connected.
Right, the settings could keep it on.
Cross the Pacific Ocean and reach San Francisco, and by train, I guess they cross Salt Lake City down to Washington D.C., where they met the President Grant at the time. Then, right after the Civil War in the United States, as you know, and Grant became a president. 1872, March the 4th here. Then they tried to sort of do a pre-negotiation on the so-called unequal treaties, which also couldn't materialize, but I'll probably touch on that issue too. And then they, I think, stayed almost 6 months because of the certain sort of the incident happened. But then they, from Boston to first, I guess, Liverpool, I guess they arrived, and London, and also they met Queen Victoria, although at that time she was on leave and maybe in summer house or something. But later they could meet Queen Victoria. And then Paris, they met President Thiers after this Paris Commune. And then Brussels, Leopoldo II, in Hague, William III, and Berlin, Wilhelm I. Then go to St. Petersburg. They also met the Alexander II.
Do you have the cable? Daddy, do you have the cable? Electric cable?
And Copenhagen, Stockholm, Rome, Vienna, Berlin, these Berlin, Rome, then took Suez Canal down to again to southeast Singapore, Saigon, Hong Kong, Shanghai, back to Yokohama. Altogether 1 year and 10 months, close to 1 year, 10 months actually. It's longer than expected actually because of certain incident. But anyway, let me just speak on this Iwakura mission, which many claim that was perhaps the first mission in world history to include such a large proportion of a country's leadership sent abroad for an extended period at the time of national crisis. Taking a longer view, the Iwakura mission may be seen as one of the historical relatives of transnationalism and perhaps the greatest experiment in transnational local interactions dealing with culturally meaningful borders. This was a period in which Japan became what Joseph Nye of Harvard University called Asia's first globalizer. After their lengthy official journey to the West, Meiji reformers sat down to the task of constructing a state, drafting the constitution, establishing a national educational system, and rapidly industrializing and militarizing the country. In themselves, these initiatives demonstrate Japan's specific acceptance-rejection pattern of cultural borrowing. Analysis presented here tells a story of a late modernizer that felt an urgent need to become acquainted with Western enlightenment and civilization in order to join the ranks of the major powers of the day as a sovereign, independent nation-state, and eventually to challenge Western colonialism with its own. There's certain, and I would run into this composition of Iwakura mission too. Then. The Iwakura mission was composed of almost 50 officials, including the ambassador, 4 vice ambassadors, and a number of commissioners, with a balance consisting of secretaries and translators. Another 50 members were students who are being dispatched to Europe and the United States to obtain a Western education. In addition to exploratory talks concerning the treaty revisions, the officials were given the task of studying Western institutions, cultures, and the commissioners and their support staff compiled reports for submission to the government upon their return. These documents are later edited and incorporated into a final report written by Kume Kunitake, who was then the private secretary to the Iwakura, Ambassador Iwakura. This was called in Japanese Reio Kairan Jikki. We usually say Jikki, but it's an actual account of their journey that they initially published in 100 volumes, and then later to later actually into maybe 5 volumes. In fact, it came out in 1977, the first volume, to 1980s for the whole volume, 5 volumes. The Jikki, this actual account, was a kind of culmination of the in-process examination of Western civilization, an examination which was formally concluded with the drafting of the Meiji Constitution in 1889, but continued on many other levels throughout the Meiji period. Iwakura mission represented the greatest and last attempt by the Japanese government to inquire into the true nature of the West and attempt to account for its wealth, power, and enlightenment. Judging by its composition, which included important figures from the Meiji regime and some former Tokugawa officials who had helped to usher in the new age, it is clear that the Meiji government was determined to draw up guidelines and basic blueprint for comprehensive modernization of Japan, a process which had been haphazard since the Meiji Restoration. However, their subsequent report, the Jikki, the actual account, was one of only one link, though a vital one, in a long tradition of learning from abroad. It was another specific illumination of the more positive phase of that acceptance-rejection pattern typical of Japan's cross-cultural relations. What follows is a rather brief description of the first-hand observations made by the Iwakura officials, including some reflective comments noted along the way, most of which were documented in the actual account called the Jikki. The members of the mission traveled longer than they had originally intended and spent 22 months on a journey that began across the Pacific in the United States, where they first visited the west coast city of San Francisco after a few stops at points in between, and they ended their American sojourn at the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. They next set sail across the Atlantic to Europe, visiting England, France, Prussia, Belgium, the Netherlands, Russia, and Northern Europe, Switzerland, Austria, Italy, but canceling the planned stop in Spain and Portugal due to internal strife in Spain, as you know, as you well know. On the way back to Japan via Mediterranean Sea and Indian Ocean, they briefly visited points in Africa and Asia. Although one of the objectives of the mission was exploratory talks prior to the treaty revisions, Jiki hardly mentioned the subject for those discussions started from the beginning. Okubo and Ito Hirobumi did broach the subject to the American officials, but the caretaker government back in Japan was taken aback when the two men unexpectedly returned from the United States to ask for negotiating authority and to express the intention of holding a joint conference with the European governments after successfully concluding their talks with the Americans. Meiji government felt that Okubo and Ito had gone too far. It opposed and objected to their high-handed manner and imposed strict conditions for any subsequent negotiations. The government opposition was not only a consequence of Japan's internal power struggle, but of genuine concern that the mission might endanger Japan by conceding most favored nation status to the United States, privilege that European nations will most certainly demand as well. As a consequence, the exploratory talks never succeeded in the context of the Iwakura mission. As you know, this is really it's about unequal treaties that when after Perry came and then Townsend Harris comes as a consul general and to negotiate the trade agreement. Although Townsend Harris, I understand, is also a free trader. He was already in China before that, and also he was a businessman apparently too. And he was by Perry's recommendation that Townsend Harris came to Yokohama as a consul general, because there was a stipulation already in the Treaty of Amity that concluded by Perry and Tokugawa officials that set up a consulate in Yokohama. So with that sort of anchorage that the Harris then began to negotiate on a treaty, trade treaty. The problem there subsequently is that this is really a unilateral sort of trade agreement, and also tariff fixed at 5% import tariff, which is very low in that at that time. Other countries like a 20%, 35%, all that. So the unequal in that the Japanese government was deprived of this tariff sort of tariff sovereignty. In a sense, Japanese official cannot raise or lower the tax the tariff at all. The other is concerning the extraterritoriality. Yes, in Europe, in the diplomatic wars, this is also well sort of developed. But normally, ambassador and the minister may be exempt from the trial or this in the host country. But this again is also applied to all the subsequent residents, Americans, not only officials but business people know that. And problem here is that any wrongdoings by, say, American citizens in Yokohama or Japan cannot be tried in the Japanese law court. And so this sort of, but it's a first alliance for Japan, which it's a commercial treaty. And then also, as you know, there's other powers also in Asia, like Britain or France, and Russia and Dutch. They simply follow suit of this treaty that President Harris negotiated back with the Tokugawa officials. And then, of course, Tokugawa was ousted, as you know, and coming of the Meiji Restoration. But they inherited these amicable treaties that one of the objectives of this mission is to also see if if there's a possibility of revising these amicable treaties, but at the same time, as what they are really concerned is to what extent Japanese domestic reform is really needed to have this revision later on. At any rate, during the course of their travels, missions members implicitly assumed that the Occident would contrast strongly with the Orient, that each European country visited would be the antithesis of either Japan or China. Interestingly enough, this assumption became more self-conscious as they approached the end of their journey. Just as significant was their particular interest in the United States. They embarked upon their journey to America well aware that it had not only achieved independence from Europe, but that it was celebrating its centennial. Hence, the uttermost question in their minds was just how the United States had managed to unify its population and develop its resources to such a great effect after only 100 years of independence, in contrast to underdeveloped Japan, which was centuries older. The initial assessment of the members of the mission was the American enterprise, particularly evident in the development of the country's western frontier, found its inspiration in the origins of the American people, whom they characterized as a devout Protestant nonconformist, devoted to the principles of freedom. Indeed, since their first stop was in the United States, the members of the mission were subsequently forced to grapple with the question of the relationship between religion and civilization, or perhaps more accurately, the contrast between the freedom of religion that they observed in the Occident, as well as its consequences, and the absence of such freedom in the Orient. After visiting a number of factories, they became convinced that the success of American enterprise was connected to an American orientation toward practical learning that emphasized general education. This practical or material learning, they felt, was reflective of rational scientific spirits and more conducive to industrial, agricultural, and commercial advancement than the immaterial, morally centered education found in the Orient. Politically, the Japanese visitors saw the United States as truly Republican in nature, for it had been founded by energetic Europeans deeply dedicated to the concepts of freedom and self-rule, and determined to extend these principles to a new land. However, they did wonder if there was at least one defect in the Republican system when they noticed the poverty of American blacks living on the outskirts of major cities, but observing that even among blacks, one could find self-reliant, educated congressmen or wealthy, cultured individuals. They refused to attribute this phenomenon to racism, arguing instead that poverty, indolence, and filth were common among the lower classes in all Western countries. Thus, by separating prosperity from color, they again equated success with education. In the eyes of the members of the Iwakura mission, the West's industrial and commercial advances appear all the more impressive in the face of the untiring race for progress that they observed. Struggle to achieve wealth and power despite an enormous expenditure of human and natural resources. They characterize this constant competition as a West peacetime warfare and attribute it in part to the value that Christianity placed upon hard work and self-improvement, two qualities very different from those encouraged by Oriental religions. Eastern learning, which was most Confucian in nature, emphasized goodness of man and the pursuit of wisdom. The members of the mission further noticed that Western education was not only utilitarian but also universal, as the actual accounts note. Its practical value as preparation for one's occupation and for intelligent citizenship is enormous. On a larger scale, the relation of education to Western technology and progress is obvious. So major reformers saw emulation of the West's practical learning as a first step toward Western prosperity. Kido, who visited 3 elementary schools in San Francisco, became most enthusiastic about establishing universal public education in Japan. Although he also emphasized moral benefits such as social stability and inculcation of such social virtues as loyalty, compassion, and justice. Kido wrote in his diary in 1872 that there were as many as 141,700 schools, 221,400 teachers, and 7,210,000 students in the United States at that time. These statistics came as a great surprise to Kido because he knew of no more than a few domain and village schools in Japan. He says civilization required men of talent first of all, and he realized that the only way to produce them was through state-sponsored national education. Or as Kido himself writes, supply of such people in endless numbers over a long period of time clearly depends on education, and on education alone. Our people are no different from the Americans or Europeans of today. It is all the matter of education, or lack of education. Now, see. By signaling the complete reversal in policy, Kido immediately instructed the Japanese Ministry of Education to overhaul the educational system. In February of 1872, the ministry announced the establishment of public elementary schools and other educational institutions focused upon Western studies. It also took the unprecedented step of granting school administrators permission to accept application for admission from commoners. On the subject of international relations, this actual account, Jikki describes the West as essentially an armed camp, with its component states constantly competing for power. To the authors, this was indicative of the difference between the Occidental and Oriental temperaments. It is a scene of incessant struggle between weak and strong nations for independence and wealth and power. small countries of Belgium, Holland, Sweden, and Switzerland, like porcupines bristling their quills, show up their defenses. While they secure their nations, they are not able to loosen the straps of their helmets. The end result was a hierarchy of international domination maintained by a balance of military power among the most powerful nations, such as England, France, Germany, and Austria. While visiting Europe, authors of the Jikki were always mindful of regional differences resulting from variations in history and the natural environment, yet they came to stress at the same time the importance of Western character, which was seen as a non-material foundation of the West opulence and power, and as being very distinct from the Oriental character. They became conscious that it was in large part the West historical experience, cultural values, social structuring, and so forth that accounted for the West's superior status, and the proper combination of factors might be impossible to reproduce elsewhere. Paradoxically then, their increased understanding of the West created as many questions as answers. For one notes, the price of this new sophistication was surely to compound the uncertainty about how to proceed, making the content, scope, and timing of Westernization reforms much more difficult to decide. Japan's new leadership had to realize the magnitude of the job that confronted them. Was it possible to transplant Western industry and technology without adopting the whole social, political structure and the value system of the West? Could there be a workable synthesis of the two? Beyond some indirect hints, the Jikki actual account offers no answers to questions like these. Now, thus for men like Kido and Okubo, they are major reformers and traveling along, the main issue was to resolve the perceived incompatibility to harmonize the contradictions between the liberal Western system and the despotic imperial system, which they saw as epitomizing Japan's national character, in order to work out a strategy for civilization that would not harm the national polity. However, it was only when they visited Prussia during the last year of their journey, specifically in March 1873, that workable solution presented itself to them, one inspired by a power of German militarism, defeating the culturally superior France, the mastery with which Bismarck manipulated the Reichstag and the brilliance of Kaiser's autocratic government. Bismarck hosted the state dinner for the members of the mission and lectured them about the inevitability of power politics due to the arbitrary use of modern international law by the great powers at the expense of smaller ones. He also told Kido, sitting next to him, that he would send competent advisors to Japan if needed, in order to ensure a friendly relationship between the two countries. In retrospect, this was a moment of a national resolution to build a modern Japan upon the Prussian model. And I just let me quote, this is the state dinner that Bismarck hosted, and he made a speech here that very decisive mission. During the dinner party this evening, the prince related to the story of his own life from the time of his youth, saying, "Nations these days all appear to conduct relations with amity and courtesy, but this is entirely superficial. For behind this facade lurks a struggle for supremacy and mutual contempt." as all you gentlemen know, when I was a young boy, Prussia was weak and poor. To describe the state of affairs in this small nation in those times always fills me with such intense indignation that I cannot dispel the image from my mind. From the very beginning, the so-called international law, which was supposed to protect the rights of all nations, afforded us no security at all. In cases involving dispute, great power would invoke international law and stand its ground if it stood to benefit. But if it stood to lose, it would simply change tack and use military force, so that it never limited itself to defense alone. Small nations like ours, however, would assiduously abide by the letter of the law and the universal principles, not daring to transgress them, so that, faced with ridicule and contempt from the greater powers, we inevitably fail to protect our right to autonomy, no matter how hard we tried. Arose by this deplorable state of affairs, we summoned our strength as a nation and made great efforts to promote patriotic spirit, with a view to becoming a country which merited due respect in diplomatic affairs. In the several decades since then, right up to the present day, all we have ever set out to achieve has simply been to uphold the autonomous rights of each nation. Nevertheless, we hear constant expressions of horror from other powers at the way Prussia has used force on all fronts, and they censure us for rejoicing in our military prowess and depriving people of their sovereign rights. This, however, is entirely contrary to the will of our country. For it is our hope that, motivated solely by respect for national rights, each nation may be independent and conduct diplomatic relations on equal terms, living within its just territories without its borders being violated. Fortunately, the learned men of the world realize that in past campaigns too, we have been left with no choice but to use force for the sake of Germany's sovereign rights. We hear of the distress caused to nations by the way in which Britain and France covet overseas colonies, exploiting their resources and wielding power as they please. So the day has not yet come when we can place our trust in amicable relations in Europe. You gentlemen as well must not drop your guard of vigilance and apprehension. For having been born in a small nation myself and knowing the state of affairs here intimately, this is a point I appreciate most deeply. It is also precisely why I am determined not to let public debate divert me from my quest to win full sovereign rights for our nation. So while Japan may now have amicable diplomatic relations with a number of countries, its friendship with Germany should be the most intimate of all, because of the true respect in which we hold the right of self-government. That's Bismarck's speech at the dinner. Then I should go into how then major leaders, these major reformers, after coming back, particularly Ito, who tries to culturally frame the Meiji Constitution, and, which gives way these people appropriate the Western cultures and civilizations, particularly on the Prussian model, I think. Experience gained by the member of the Iwakura mission was a principal factor that united both critics and advocates the invasion on Korea behind the government westernization program. This is the caretaker government. The leading would say, the new Meiji government sent a letter to Korea and dynasty for the recognition of the Japanese sovereignty. But Korea had a tributary system with China. China was the master there, and in fact, this letter had the Chinese character ko, which means it's the emperor. But Tenno is also a kind of emperor too. That really revolted. I mean, sort of didn't the Korean dynasty actually disliked, because they're using a Chinese sort of emperor's character there for their own. So they refused to recognize the Meiji government. And it's East Asia then is more of a Chinese sort of image of sort of world order. So because they refused to recognize the Meiji government and as a sovereign nation, that this caretaker governments also got angry actually, so they wanted to punish Korea for that, and they are ready to do so. But when this Iwakura mission came back, and but they certainly thought that after having observed these Western countries, that this attack in Korea is not a really propitious time, and it's not good for the interest of the Meiji, and this is where this they stopped this plan of attack. Now, their shared understanding focused upon those innovations which reinforced the political, economic, and social effectiveness, national education, large-scale mechanized factories, constitutional form of government, and a modern military system. These became the basis for the policies of the government, leading to enactment of the decrees on the school system and education, the encouragement of manufacturing, organization of Ministry of Home Affairs, preparation for constitutional government, through the establishment of the Gendo-in, which is a kind of Senate, and the implementation of a conscription system and build-up of modern military power. After the Iwakura mission had returned from Europe, an imperial edict was issued ordering the preparation of the Meiji Constitution. It was finally promulgated on 11 February 1889 after a lengthy and intense period of gestation. In the interim, the work of framing the Constitution generated intense debate particularly with regard to the appropriate Western model for Japanese appropriation and modification. Okuma Shigenobu, for instance, is another minister and became also prime minister too later. He proposed a system based on British parliamentary monarchy, but Iwakura and Ito bitterly opposed it, arguing that it was incompatible with the Japanese tradition. For them, tradition meant kokutai, the national polity, whose source of political authority was unbroken lineage of the Japanese emperor. This political theology, if you like, was grounded in the sovereign legitimacy of the emperor since time immemorial, had been systematically constructed by Motori Norinaga of the School of National Learning in the late Tokugawa era. Motori's teaching had deeply influenced Iwakura while he was in Kyoto in 1867, just before the Meiji Restoration, 6 months before the Meiji Restoration, and he and other reformers saw it as providing a viable basis for their own political influence. Iwakura favored the idea of kokutai, national polity, because it vested the political authority in the emperor and not in the commoners, and he successfully managed to discredit and exclude the idea of dual sovereignty implicit in the Western constitutional monarchies, then becoming prevalent. These were the circumstances behind the government mission organized in 1882 to consult constitutional scholars in Germany and Austria. Ito visited Bismarck in Germany and was tutored on constitutional questions by Rudolf von Geneist, Albert Moss, and Lorenz von Stein in Austria. Along with Iwakura and Inoue Kowashi, Ito's closest advisor, he decided that Japan's best option was to follow the Prussian model of parliamentary monarchy. After spending a year in Europe, Ito and his associates found the system in Bismarck's Germany to be more impressive and appealing than American-style mass democracy, particularly because of the former's perceived role in Germany's 1871 defeat of France. Ito and Okuba were astounded by the combination of democracy, social policies, and authoritarianism at work in Germany, and undoubtedly saw some affinity between Germany and Meiji Japan. In Berlin, for instance, they found that the real source of political power seemed to be the Kaiser's loyal and faithful bureaucracy, despite the existence of political parties. One great problem that they encountered when framing the constitution was deciding how to incorporate the historical peculiarities of Japan into the constitutional framework of parliamentary monarchy. In 1878, Hermann Rossler, a German scholar, was hired by the Japanese government as a legal advisor and collaborated with Ito and Inoue. Despite their general agreement upon legal matters pertaining to the constitution, one important difference of opinion soon became apparent. This concerned the religious, even mythological references to the emperor contained in Article 1 of the Constitution and in the paragraph of the preamble, which read respectively, "The Emperor of Japan shall be reigned over and governed by the line of emperors unbroken for ages eternal. Having by virtue of the glories of our ancestors ascended the throne of a lineal succession unbroken for ages eternal, the rights of sovereignty of the state we have inherited from our ancestors, and we shall bequeath them to our descendants." It was a task of Ito in particular to frame the constitution in such a way as to make the distinct history of Japan appear consistent with the Western model chosen. One possible solution that Ito and Inoue initially conceived from their colleagues was the establishment of Kintei Kenpo, or the idea that the constitution had been vested in the emperor by his ancestors. In theory, then, the emperor and a few trusted men, that is oligarchs, could legitimately govern the nation without or even in defiance of parliamentary authority. It was here that the idea of kokutai, national politics, came into play. In 1888, Ito made a speech before the Privy Council on the fundamental role of kokutai for the Meiji Constitution, emphasizing the following points. First, he used the example of the important role of traditional religion in European governance to underline the indispensable nature of a religio-political ethos in providing an integrative core for a nation's entire political system. Second, he pointed out that the religion in Japan had traditionally shown itself to be unable to unite the nation. Thus, although Buddhism had once flourished, it was now in decline. And although Shinto transmitted the ancestors' moral teachings, it was too weak to provide a source of national unity. Third and last, he argued that only the traditional authority of the imperial house could generate the ethos for the national unification of Japan. In the process of framing the Meiji Constitution and programming the national educational system to evangelize the kokutai ideology, we see an example of the functions of ideological transferability. Ito's reference to religious elements of Article 1 of the Constitution is rooted in a tradition of ancestor worship, which has been preserved and transmitted through various forms of kinship and communal organization. The cultural framing of the Constitution was effected by the transformation of this traditional practice and the notions underlying it into a state ideology. Now, the kokutai ideology then was a complex product synchronically constructed by the archetype cultural values and the politically amplified folk mythology. Thus, there exists some parallelism between the symbolic structure of the primary and secondary social entities and ideologically constructed nation-state under the Meiji government. New national ideology, as exemplified in the Meiji Constitution, functions positively to unite the new nation in a relatively short period of time in defense against the pressures exerted by Western nations. The Meiji Constitution was a remarkable product of a joint effort by German scholars and Meiji political leaders and did contain some progressive elements such as guarantees of fundamental freedoms, provision for male suffrage, and the establishment of a bicameral legislature with the right to approve the budget. Moreover, although the Meiji emperor himself was an authoritarian reactionary who was made the center of the state and its ultimate authority under the constitution, his responsibilities were in reality delegated to proxies, albeit loyal, faithful bureaucrats. And in reality, it was the Meiji government that concocted the state Shinto, interpreted not as a religion, but as a cult of national morality and patriotism, particularly through education, which became the government's way of inculcating ethnocentric nationalism and the strengthening of the emperor cult once the conservative education rescript had been issued. Finally, for the Meiji government, the policy of Fukoku Kyohei enriched the country and strengthened its military had as its objective the strengthening of the military and as its method the enriching of the country. That is a reversal of the ends-means continuum. Once wise statesmen had left the scene, some were assassinated, a military wing of the government, prompted by perceived threats of Western colonialism, took advantage of the so-called awe-inspiring power of the emperor, now firmly entrenched in the constitution, to take the nation unilaterally into a long-desired territorial expansion in East Asia, and in 1945, to the ultimate demise of the Meiji state itself. Thank you very much for listening.
Yes. Questions, please.
I will ask you the first question. And thank you very much for your talk, Professor Okura. And since the screen says help, I will ask your help to regarding a problem that here in this university is a kind of classic theoretical problem. When we discuss the Far East, East Asia and Southeast Asia in the 19th century, we discuss the Japanese Meiji modernization vis-à-vis the Chinese lack of capitalist development in the 19th century. Normally, the classic answer is that the Meiji modernization was an imitation of the West. The embassy is basically an embassy for learning from the West, and finally they learn from Bismarck. It's a system of military industrialization that worked for the unification of Germany. Nevertheless, you give us a lot of tips, a lot of clues, indicating that although there is this idea of following up, imitating the West, there was traditions like the emperor, there was religious traditions that were also framing the Japanese modernization. Can we say at the end that the 19th century modernization of Japan was only an imitation of the West, or was a Japanese invention?
Well, I would be satisfied with the say Paul Ricoeur, for instance, a French philosopher who talks about appropriation, which is really these leaders and subsequent politicians too took something foreign and made its own. This is what I think happened in the Meiji period. So it's not simply, it's a selective adaptation, of course, not simply the wholesale importation of Western ideas and civilizations. Well, that's of course in through the learning process, and yet finally they have to decide what aspects, what the institutional arrangement might be adopted or accepted by the Japanese people. I would say that it's basically it's a process of appropriation, trying to make its own. I mean, one is initially a foreign. So that would be my sort of answer to your question.
Very well, thank you.
Yes.
Well, it's interesting to compare the process of modernization in Japan with China. This medieval Renaissance, or how to call it, was coming from above, and in a very short time, at least in the structure, very big changes. What you say, the educational system, then the constitution, but then especially also the military. And then combining it around the emperor, nationalism. It was really, you could say, structured, with help of some Western intellectuals. In China, it seems it was a different process. Like early the typing revolution. They took up certain ideas already. I wanted to change. It came from beneath. Then they tried also once from above to change, yeah, 1895, yeah, the 100 days reform that time, yeah. But later, they started to, the intellectuals, to fight against Confucianism. And this was a process, yeah, which was not dictated from above, but something they realized we have to change, and this fighting, yeah. And then was even the revolution, Sun Yat-sen came also from beneath, yeah. And then the country somehow was falling apart, yeah. But the process of taking up Western ideas continued, yeah. And this was the whole time more or less still when the communists took over, yeah. So it was in a certain way a longer process.
Marxism is European.
Yeah, it was Western, but it was slowly taken up, yeah. And from beneath, you could say, not from above. Now we do these changes, yeah. So the process, I think it's still going on. And that would be interesting what happened afterwards in Japan, what was really taken up from Western ideas. In China, I think it's still today has not found yet its identity. This is the process is still going on. Yeah.
Well, I mean, the base difference there lies in the basic attitudes toward things foreign. As you know, Japan was very much adept at borrowing Chinese cultures and civilizations, and even the first nation state, if you like, established in 7th century by Prince Shotoku, was very much modeled after Chinese, say, bureaucratic model, and also, you know, Buddhism. He felt it's trying to harmonize the Japanese Shinto, the native religion, and Buddhism. For them, it's very, I mean, kind of very easy to well, you know, that they could learn and adopt these foreign cultures and civilizations. And from 16th century on, that the Europeans also come to Japan too, Portuguese and Spaniards, and later these empires. But so they are very, you know, they are in that sense great learners, in a sense, from great civilizations, and so even for going, and so when they encounter the Western civilizations, as they did, it was they are very receptive to, you know, foreign cultures and civilizations. Whereas China, at least in a comparable period in history, for one thing is, I guess, Empress Dowager will really fail to unify the country, but more confined to her own sort of her own, you know, sort of private concerns. Where Japan, these reformers actually had trying to at least, I mean, come to to establish, you know, including through the constitutional makeup, the unified country in an independent unified country. So this and also maybe because Chinese civilization was also one of the world civilizations, almost like, and so that the Chinese probably literati and all the intellectuals didn't think much of the Western, you know, civilization as worthwhile, even emulating or anything like that. So I think there's a basic sort of difference of attitudes that sort of diverge their modernization process, seems to me.
Nevertheless, in methodological terms, I think we cannot discuss only China and Japan. You need to discuss China and the world, Japan and the world, because the professor, I find it very, very interesting. You were stressing that the embassy was trying to revise the treaty. The 1870s, 1880s is the period of the trade treaties. After the Perry expedition in Japan, you have the treaty in Macao that recognized Portuguese sovereignty in 1877. You have the treaty in Hong Kong, you have the treaty in Thailand. In fact, you have only Thailand, Japan and China as sovereign countries. You have trade treaties in this period in all the sovereign countries in East Asia and Southeast Asia. We have the treaties with China, we have the treaties in Japan. So the problem here is not only the imitation of the West. The West is the economic empire. It's a global empire. You need to have a trade position, an economic position. Even China, the Taiping Revolution was defeated also by British and French soldiers. So methodologically, I think we need to also include the global perspective. And I think I found it very. I didn't know that the embassy was trying to review the trade the treaties.
Well, in China, I think after the Chinese-Japanese War in 1895, Yen Fu introduced the idea of evolutionism. And there he spoke out, and if we don't open up, then we are out. Yeah. And my teacher, he was one of the specialists of modern Chinese history, he said this might have been the most influential book in modern China, or at least one of the most influential. It introduced Darwinism, but not as a theory, but it was more using it for China. If we are not adapting to modern times, we are out. Yeah. So this competition, yeah, this came very strongly then as one idea, yeah, of.
There's another interesting contrast with the Chinese gentry class or literati, intellectuals, and the Japanese intellectuals, samurais. You see, the samurais, since they are the warriors to start with, that they are very keen on the technological aspects, and I think Chinese literati are now really, didn't show any strong interest in the Western science and technology. I think that's a big difference. In fact, there was a Portuguese shipwreck in the southern island of Kyushu, and the Japanese quickly or immediately noticed that these Portuguese had a musket, and for them, so that they could see that this is a good weaponry to have, and also fight in warfare. And so the Oda Nobunaga, for instance, who first sort of subdued all the local laws, actually won the battles with the use of muskets, you know. So these people, I mean, samurais, you know, in their temperament, they're very keen on this science and technology, where Chinese didn't show much interest. So there's a difference there that you can make a contrast.
It's a very important difference. The Chinese, if there was a Portuguese shipwreck, they will try to get astronomical instruments, not weapons. Very intelligent remark.
Because they are samurai and their temperament, they are keen on science and technology.
Professor Okuda, this is a little off topic. It's moving forward into the 20th century, so it's very good. I'm a little curious about your thoughts on the change in this system right after World War II. This harmony between the traditional Japanese perspective and the influx of the Western perspective, it rests on using the emperor as a national, as like the heart of national identity. And right after World War II, Kokutai it's destroyed because the emperor claims that he's mortal. So after this big sort of a bombshell, how does the Japanese political system continue on?
Well, this is again very much dependent on the American-led occupation forces, and MacArthur is the major figure, and they wanted to, first of all, what they wanted is first of all, is a demilitarization of Japan. Right? The other is a democratization of Japan. And also there is a breakup of the monopoly capitalism too, which to some extent part of this Japanese even sort of aggression in China. And also educational system too. So it's basically it's a more of American model that was in a sense again imposed from above in a sense. But again, it's interesting to note that the people realized, Japanese people realized it was really military is more of a unilateral action, and that finally sort of brought about Japan's sort of downfall. And they are really rejoiced by this American occupation forces and policies to restructure the Japanese society in a more democratic way. Even I think Constitution of 1947, the Showa Constitution, that was pretty much drafted by the Americans in two weeks' time. And then, of course, Japanese government and officials consulted, of course. But that's their initiative, American initiative, actually, so very much. So Japanese people after the war is very they are grateful to this American occupation's radical, reform, domestic reform.
I guess, I'm sorry, my question is more, after there's this sort of external reconstruction of Japanese politics, is there another effort similar to the Iwakura mission, which is to look for some Japanese traditional center of identity and meld that with this more Western political system? Because you no longer have the emperor as the center. Is there another search for that sort of heart?
No, I don't think so. The emperor was eventually designated as a symbol of Japanese people. They are deprived of any political power, so that certainly there won't be any kind of sort of old national polity based on the emperor's power. But I guess they realize that in order to internationalize Japan, which really requires the domestic reforms, and that's what they are after, I suppose. How Japan can be made more compatible with the sort of international society, for instance.
Tying this together, I think all three converge this idea that now Japan is arising from below, as you were saying, that China is rising from below. The mission didn't seem to have detected the idea that the Germans could have better risen from below, and the downgrading of the Japanese emperor and upgrading of the people. How did the Germans go through that same process? Bismarck and William probably thought that the elites were absolutely essential in prosperity of the country, in success. But as a matter of fact, the Germans don't have an emperor now, and they're doing fairly well. Actually,
Merkel.
Well, Bertrand Russell said before the First World War, he said, really, we English should not interfere. We should let the Germans take Europe, and we'd be right where we are now.
Yeah.
And without the First or Second World War. You could have obviated all that, First and Second World War, if we just if we English sensibly stay isolated, as don't join the continent. But the secret of the German success is not from the top down, but it's the German people from the bottom up. And a lot of the German people went to America. Isn't that part of the bottom up? If the analysis is right, so that the was the mission in partially a failure to recognize that maybe the American model would ultimately be a better model. Did the Japanese? Just a question on the historic question. The Tokugawa was not the emperor god, was he? I mean, he was. So that the Meiji period was an attempt to transform the weak emperor into a strong emperor, and so it happened very quickly, didn't it? I mean, 1868. Did it happen quickly, or was it a long transition from the weak emperor to the strong emperor? If they're just creating the strong emperor in a very few years, and they're looking to Prussia for a strong emperor, and they see a weak emperor in Russia. They're apparently very disappointed that the Russians seem to be so weak, right? And later on, of course, they verified it with the Russo-Japanese War, right? Which confirmed that thing. But so, what surprises me is that the Japanese were at a point where they could have decided to downgrade it, but they decided to elevate the emperor. And elevating the emperor, along with the Prussian model, as you say, elevating the emperor, could they not have decided to do it the other way around and arrive at the same place they are now a lot earlier? Just like the Germans, if they had not elevated the elites and followed the bottom-up Chinese tradition, they would have been where they are. No.
Yeah, also, I mean, there's the days of Western imperialism too.
No.
There's a sort of competition, say, between the British Empire and the Russian Empire. And sort of Japan was beginning to find itself is perhaps they could play the role of hegemon in East Asia as sort of in challenging the Western, colonization. The idea of the great Asia co-prosperity sphere, for instance, although that's very debatable. I mean, it's basically they place Japan as a sort of hegemon and in East Asia, and although they're trying to save East Asia from the encroachment of the Western, the colonization. It's still a very debatable point there. But I think Japan made a mistake from the occupation of Manchukuo and make it a kind of puppet government and advancing in the China. And that really infuriated the Americans too. I mean, the American officials, and that they should, in order for any kind of diplomatic negotiation with the United States, they insisted, and even Cordell Hull insisted there that unless Japan's sort of military is evacuated from the Asia and China, they are not prepared to negotiate diplomatically with Japan. I think Japanese military went too far, and even unilaterally, that is disregarding the civil government at home. That's why they made a mistake.
Well, Bismarck went in steps. It's even so. Maybe the Japanese, if they had gone in smaller steps instead of the. China is a big thing to swallow in one step. But maybe if you do it piecemeal.
It is not only a problem of internal choice. It's not a problem Japan can decide this or that, because there are several external factors, including in the 1870s, Japan had a huge deficit, a huge trade deficit, even in East Asia. Trade deficit. So they were not. The militarization is a process of industrialization also, and is a process of unifying a state. You unify it through militarization and war is the Bismarck recipe. But I find very interesting, because I didn't know that they were trying to revise the trade treaties because they were losing. They were creating a huge deficit, even in foodstuff importations and things like that. One question that I would like to have time. The mission had, I think, tens of students, and some study in the United States and in Europe. They returned to Japan, most of them, they were influential in Japan later.
That's right. That's why some just served as ministers, or some are educators. And also another aspect of Western notion of the people's rights movement, thing like that too. In fact, there's one fellow named Nakae Chomin, who was on that ship, and then he stayed in France and for study, and even he became known as Japanese Rousseau, who translated the social, contra-social, and he became the leader of this people's rights movement. And there's many others. It's actually I have here the list of people who studied abroad and their subsequent positions they got. And it's very impressive, very impressive. These are 46 students or so. And also I must say that this studying abroad began in late Tokuga period actually. And Iwakura's sort of son, two sons are already studying in the United States when they arrived in Washington, and even sons are telling him that you have to cut off your top knots because it's out of date. Actually, so when we saw the picture there, he had one, but when he returned, he had no top knots. It became westernized in that sense. But already at that time, if you see them, they had a Japanese traditional attire, but they had leather boots on it. And so that's, how they are being much more sort of westernized. But I understand that the Meiji Emperor, who was still young, below 20 years of age, apparently he didn't like military uniform, although he had to wear it first for the people, for the public. So he wore this. The Meiji Emperor wore this military uniform, and you see some of the photos sort of left for us to see.
Probably a good place to, since Kaz is an example of a mission to the West and going to the West and an educational mission and coming back and coming back to Japan. Good place to leave it. I think. Thank you very much, Kuda.
Thank you.